Does the God of the Bible have a physical body? We've been told, and I was taught, no, God is outside space and time. God is not a man, right? We want to emphasize that. Even though there is some way within the Trinitarian thought where the Son can, hypostatic union, can have a body and be fully 100% God and fully 100% man. Wrap your head around that. Don't know how. At the end of the day, though, that the God of Jesus, the Father, the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh, Adonai, El Elyon, El Shaddai, this deity is incorporeal. This deity is spirit. This deity has no flesh or no physical body whatsoever. And so we're going to discuss this today with a scholar who was taught by Francesca Stavrakopoulou. So let's just get right into this because you're going to want to take some notes. I'm fairly confident I'm going to learn some things today, even though I've read her book, God and Anatomy. There's always something, and Dan always shocks me. So Dr. Dan McClellan, welcome back to MythVision.
Thanks for having me, Derek. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Let's get the plugs out of the way because I know for a fact that if you have never heard this topic or you have never dove deep into this, if you're a viewer watching, stay tuned. I swear you're going to learn something new. It's really a shocking topic because I really had no clue that this was the case. So real quick, in the description, pinned at the top, we're going to be checking to see how many subscribers you get by the end of the stream. And stick around. Let's get to at least 14.5K subscribers. He's got a YouTube channel. We are checking that at the end. Everyone who subscribed has entered the New Jerusalem. Also go to Twitter. You can see his link tree here. I follow him on Twitter. He's on Instagram and Facebook. And also we have in the description his book, which is a scholarly book on the divine images of really the gods in the ancient Near East, but Yahweh specifically. And that is an amazing book. I hope anyone will go and get. It's free if you want it in the ebook copy, like what I'm looking at right here. So you can download this for free. If you want a paperback, you can go on Amazon, type in Yahweh's Divine Images, a cognitive approach, or just type his name out, and you can get this version of it in your hands. So you don't have to have it in e-version. There's our plugs. I mean, obviously, I could do my shameless plugs for MythVision, but Dan, does God have a body?
Well, according to the biblical authors, yes, God has at least one body, and God's bodies are described in a variety of different ways. In fact, a very popular book that was published, 2009 by Benjamin Summer was called The Bodies of God and the World of Ancient Israel. Talked not just about God's own corporeality, but how God's presence and God's self was manifested within divine images. And my book primarily deals with the divine images side of things, but I also talk quite a bit about God's own corporeal anthropomorphic body.
I know that the thumbnail is quite clickable with the bodybuilding, muscular warrior. I tried to match what Francesca kind of described about Yahweh as a warrior deity, young, dark beard, well taken care of, probably smelled good, the whole nine, right? She goes into details in a whole nother way.
Yeah.
It almost makes you think that's the kind of guy she likes. Well, in this right here is a paper you sent me where an actual scholar is saying the gigantic body of God, this muscular deity. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, this was a really popular paper back when it came out. It's a fun paper. This is a scholar who uses the idea of bodybuilding as kind of an interpretive lens to look at God's body. And you can see it starting out there. Bodybuilding is big and getting bigger, but it goes on later. The next section is called Pure Muscle. Talks about hardcore bodybuilding as a purity system and talks about how purity and things like that relate to the idea of God's body. So anybody who wants to, there was a comment earlier in the stream where somebody said something about God not being a bodybuilder, but that's actually an interpretive lens that scholars have used to look at the God of the Bible, because at least Adonai, and I'm using that as a way to distinguish that divine profile from that of El, who is the patriarchal high deity. This is the aged white beard sitting on a throne. That's a separate divine profile. And that is distinct from the Adonai profile, which is the storm deity profile. And the storm deity is young, virile warrior. Their warrior features are represented using imagery associated with violent weather, thunder, lightning, floods, storms, things like that. And so that is the Adonai divine profile of someone who is they're represented in the material media. So the divine images anciently usually had them in what's called the striding smiting pose. So they would have their feet apart like they're striding, and then they'd have an arm raised with a mace in their hand. So when you think about Adonai in the Hebrew Bible, that's the divine profile that they're trying to get across, this violent warrior young deity. And even within some of the Ugaritic literature, you have him messing lots of people up.
Right. So this is when you use Adonai, we're referring to Yahweh. And of course, you do that out of respect for many people who've asked you, please, if you could use this name. And I respect you for being that kind of person. I do want to get right into the controversy. I think it's worth talking about this because several people have made a fuss, typically from what I would say are the more evangelical side of scholars, even. Obviously, evangelical type Christians that are non-academics are going to make a fuss about what has gone on with Francesca Stavrakopoulou online pertaining to her book, her work. And then, the ridiculous comments of cup size and all that nonsense, which is really not even relevant anymore. It's not for us, at least. It's really the attacks of this ridiculous idea of her book and like, are you kidding me? God has a body. I think it's really more of a jab at, whatever, if you want to say God has a body, but now you're talking about his penis and you're talking about sex and you're talking about all this stuff with our God. I mean, what is this, Pornhub? Like, that's the ridicule. So can you get right in? We're jumping in the deep end, get your floaties on. Let's go swimming.
Yeah, the texts are not incredibly equivocal. There are some euphemisms that are being used, but if Adonai is being represented in the Hebrew Bible in the same way that they are, that the storm deity profile is represented in the other literature, and all indications are that they are, then this is a God who comes fully equipped. And we even have this in the post-biblical period. There are rabbinic discussions about God's body and God's genitals. In fact, there's one discussion where somebody asks, was Adam circumcised? These days we would say, did Adam have a belly button? But in the rabbinic period, it was Adam circumcised? And the reasoning that one set of rabbis came up with is, look, Adam was made in God's image. God is perfect, therefore God is circumcised, therefore Adam was circumcised. And so there are discussions, that's just one example, but there are discussions even within rabbinic literature of God's genitals. And we have some furtive kind of euphemistic references in that direction in the Hebrew Bible. Now, one of the reasons that they are more euphemistic is because it allows the authors to kind of play with the ambiguity. A lot of people want there to just be one meaning with everything, but there's a lot of poetry in the Bible where the authors are playing with the fact that words can mean a couple different things. So, for instance, in Francesca's book, we have this discussion of Isaiah 6 and the throne theophany. And what we have is this reference to something, a Hebrew word that is, I think in the KJV, it's rendered his train filled the temple. I'm going to pull it up real quick.
Pull it up. Yeah. And by the way, your software, people can't see behind the scenes. We're not going to keep it up. Would it be possible to share your screen just to tease people with what you're using so they understand?
I'm just going to make the text even a little bigger so it's a little easier to see.
And while you're doing that, subscribe to Dan's YouTube channel. We're going to check at the end. I'm a shameless plug, but I cannot express this enough. Your support of the guest we have ensures they come back. So let's show them love. Sorry.
He's on thin ice right now, so
I'm in trouble.
I'm gonna need some. Just kidding. So let me just do a little housekeeping here. The present button, is that what I use to share my screen?
Yes, hit present, and then you should be able to share screen from there. And then you got to click the window. You obviously don't use StreamYard often.
Nope.
But yes, I am
let
on
me take
thin
a look.
ice, and what will happen to you if you don't subscribe, I can't even say on YouTube, or they will shut this channel down. So please subscribe, okay?
Okay.
And hit the like button.
Accordance.
We're gonna get, just wait till you see what we're getting into here. This is gonna be good.
Okay, you're not seeing anything right now,
Not yet.
You? Okay, let me do this again. Okay. Share screen, window.
Yes, click the window you want to share.
Okay. Click the window I want to share. I click share. Okay.
and thank you, Neil, for that super chat. We're going to get to those during Q&A. I really want to unravel some stuff first. And then I did start the MythVision clips a while back, but I just started mentioning it recently. Subscribe to the second channel. If you're not into the long stuff, we've got the shorter little hits coming out on the second channel of the good stuff that we do. Is it working?
I just got to update some stuff in the system preferences. So talk amongst yourselves.
Okay. How's everybody doing today? Have you voted yet? And I mean, on the stream, I have asked the question, does the Bible express Yahweh El, I just combined them to kind of say the God of the Bible, as having a physical body? You can vote right now, yes, no, absolutely not, right? No, or not sure. I need more information. Maybe by the end of the stream, you'll consider that and change your mind. You can vote right now. And everybody in the chat, if you've subscribed right now, 234 people, if you've subscribed, press 1 if you subscribed to Dan's YouTube channel. I want to see some of them ones.
Okay, I'm going to, in order to get the permission, I have to hop out and hop right back in. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, just give me a sec.
Okay, let's see it. Someone actually just put that. Okay, let's see it.
Yeah, I get that as surprising. I get that with surprising frequency.
Right? Hey, that's your style, man. I'll see you in a second, I guess.
All right. Yeah, just a second.
No biggie. We'll see when he just got raptured. I knew it. He's a true saint. Thank you, everybody, for subscribing. We're going to refresh that joker at the end. I love the suspense of seeing how many people go over there. Dan is on the front line dealing with conspiracy theories and ignorance and just ridiculous claims. And like someone will be like, we found the Ark of the Covenant. I think his most recent one today is pretty much like, this guy found the Ark of the Covenant. And then all of a sudden he'll be like, let's see it. And then it's some ridiculous stuff. And then he debunks it. He's back from heaven. You got kicked out of heaven. All right.
All right. Let's see. Let's see if we can do this time. And
get ready, fam. Here we go. I see it.
You seeing this? Okay.
I'm
so this
seeing
is,
it.
if you're interested, I see a lot of people share screenshots of Bible Hub and Blue Letter Bible and stuff like that, which gives you the pretty standard Strong's stuff. But if you're interested in something a little heavier, Accordance Bible software is, in my opinion, the best for looking at primary texts. Logos Bible software is another one. But anyway, so what I've got up here is on the right, the Hebrew. I've got the Septuagint translation, and then we've got the New English translation. And on the far left, I've got the NRSV up here. And so the word I want to look at, can you see the highlight where the cursor is turning things blue? Okay, on the right, you've got v'shulav, and this word shul is translated hem in the NRSV. It's train in the KJV. I think the hem of his robe filled the temple there in the NET. But this word really means something like the hanger downs, the hanging part. And I've opened up the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament so you can see how it is defined there. At the up at the top, seam, edge, lower edge of a vessel, so on and so forth. So it can refer to the seams, and that's where we see this word used a lot in the description of the tabernacle in Exodus. Sense number 2, the pubic region, and this is primarily used in reference to women who have their that part exposed as a means of shaming someone. And then number 3, seams or lower part of the body, and here it can refer to the butt and other things like that. So or the glutes, as I learned to call them when I was getting licensed as a massage therapist. But anyway, so when we look at this word in Hebrew, we've got to make a decision. This is not clear. We got to make a decision what's going on here. And hem is one possibility, but also the idea of his genitals, the hanger downs, the hanging parts. And so there have been arguments back and forth among scholars for what we should give preference to here. But I kind of like the argument that has been made that the author is intentionally playing with ambiguity here, because the idea of a hem being so large that it's filling the temple doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I agree with Francesca and others who say that there is a sense in which this is a reference to the divine manhood. And
Can we I'm going to pop us back and forth. Let me know when you want me to bring up the image that you're showing of the text. And I'm just going to come back to me and you so people can have an enjoyment in the video as well. And that is like, why would this is like a fundamental question behind. I've noticed with the other academic who was, one of them wrote an article. Kip Davis is actually bringing a death blow to that article. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait. But the idea is that they want to divorce this deity from the rest of the ancient Near East. And they don't want it to walk like a duck and talk like a duck and be a duck. They don't want their God to be that. And that's my personal opinion is you see that precept come out where they're like, no, our God is different. Just like I see Christianity is radically different from the Greco-Roman world in which it arrives. And I'm not saying there aren't unique things about it. But if you looked at any and every divinity in every narrative, there's something unique about it. So the question is, why would someone like you or Francesca or any of you academics, and notice I'm putting you all in a category here, why would you think this could be God's private parts? I mean, what would make your unclean mind come to such a conclusion?
Well, a lot of it, look, we're looking back about maybe around 2,700 years into the past. Right. And when we look back, we do not have a pristine, unadulterated, unobscured view of what they were saying, what they were thinking. We're looking back through thousands of years of interpretive lenses that have been brought to this text, ways it has been interpreted. And I've made a big deal a number of times and sometimes people give me a hard time for it, of saying that texts don't have any inherent meaning. The meaning must be provided by the mind of a reader, a viewer, a hearer. And we can only reconstruct meaning to the degree we have experience with something. And so sometimes, people will be like, well, I'm able to guess what the meaning of a word is in some places. Yes, that's because you're bringing the context and you're bringing a bunch of other experience to bear on how you're interpreting this. But the reality is there is no meaning anywhere except in the minds of hearers, readers, viewers. And so these texts, we are reconstructing the meaning. And for folks who have a commitment to a certain perspective about deity, that perspective is going to govern how they are going to reconstruct that meaning. But when we try to divest ourselves of those commitments and ask, how would they have reconstructed it anciently? If you try to travel back there and say, just using whatever data that we can reconstruct from this time period, what does this tell us about how they would have viewed deity? You do not get an incorporeal deity. There are scholars who have published arguments that the idea of incorporeality, immateriality, is something that was given to Greco-Roman period Judaism and Christianity from Greco-Roman philosophical thinkers. And so you have there are some wonderful papers that have been published on how the idea of God having a body was still mainstream within early Judaism and Christianity. Within Christianity until about the 4th century CE. Within Judaism until about the medieval period. Maimonides is probably the one who most widely popularized the immateriality of God. And up until that point, most people just assumed God had a body. And so when we try to get around these interpretive lenses that have been given to us by the received tradition, what we see is that, as you said, this deity is another Canaanite deity. And the things that make Adonai distinct are not these revolutionary ideas, but incremental elaborations on stereotypical ideas. And if I may, there was a question that was asked earlier by Gnostic Informant.
Yeah, do you want me to, let me pop it up?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
We're sneaking ahead to the Q&A here, but it's okay if you feel if that's what I want you to do what you think is best. But how would you explain the evolution of Yahweh from a Canaanite god with a physical body into being outside space and time, and why?
So there are a handful of things that go into this. As God is kind of confronting the other gods of the nations, in the Iron Age period, Israel is mainly dealing with the other territorial states around them. And so they're presenting their deity as on a par with these other deities. And there are some military forays into other nations. And sometimes Adonai wins, and that's what we have in Exodus. And sometimes Adonai loses, which is what we have in 2 Kings 3:27, where Adonai gets out of pocket, tries to return Moab to vassalage, and Chemosh smacks him down, and they've got to retreat back to Israel. And so you basically have this competition among equals. Once Jerusalem is destroyed and the Judahites are exiled, we now have a different problem to deal with. One, we got to figure out how we're going to access our deity, even though we're exiled in another country. And two, we've got to figure out a way to make sure everybody is still committed to Adonai, even though we are surrounded by all these other deities who are more accessible because there are a lot more divine images and who are more powerful. And so there's a rhetorical one-upmanship going on, where you got to say, oh, that deity is, so large, my deity is larger. That deity is so powerful, my deity is more powerful. And you keep one-upping everyone, and you get to a point where within Deutero-Isaiah and later literature, where God is, the earth is their throne and the heaven is their footstool. That's how gigantic they are. And then you get to this point where everything becomes a superlative. They are the biggest thing ever. They are the smartest thing ever. And this aids in people kind of reasoning about how it is that all these things can happen, and how it is that God can know all these things, and how it is God can help them through all of these trials. And so it's basically the trying to keep up with the circumstances and trying to present a deity that is capable of doing any possible thing that is ever needed. And ultimately you get to, oh, well, this deity's omnipotent. This deity is omniscient. This deity is omnipresent. Mm-hmm. And you get to that rhetorical statement before you have a rationalization for it, before you can explain it. And this is what I argue is the life cycle of a lot of religious dogmas. Religious dogmas are born of rhetorical need and rhetorical necessity. And then after they're born, you've got to go back and construct the rationale for it. And so the rationales, the explanations, the reasoning is pretty much always secondary. You arrive at the conclusion, and then you go back and retcon how it is that this can be. And so you have, once you get into the Greco-Roman period, and you get the influence from these thinkers, materiality, the flesh, matter, this is all base, this is all subordinate, this is low. Deities are spiritual, immaterial. That is what makes them higher. And so once you get into the 3rd and 4th century in Christianity, apologists are trying to make the gospel more palatable for the Greco-Roman intelligentsia. They got to go, okay, you know what? Our deity is the same.
Yeah. Right.
And then you reason all of that. And so it is a deity who starts off as one among many others. And I believe it's the 2nd chapter of my book, 2nd or 3rd chapter. Okay, so chapter 1 is what is a deity? Chapter 2, encountering divine. No, it's chapters 3 and 4, deity in the Hebrew Bible. And then chapter 4 is Adonai in the Hebrew Bible. And so I say, when we look in the Hebrew Bible, here is how deity is conceptualized. And it's very, very close to how the broader Southwest Asian world conceptualizes deity. Chapter 4 is Adonai in the Hebrew Bible. And I show that Adonai tags every single base of a prototypical deity. And what sets Adonai apart is not these revolutionary things that are unlike any other deity that has ever come before. What they are responses to circumstances that require we nudge this a little further ahead, and we twist this a little, and we bop this, and we do, and we are responding to these circumstances. And so Adonai is incrementally elaborated on in response to these changing circumstances until they become omnipotent, omniscient, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and immaterial. So this is a philosophical construct that takes centuries to really get fleshed out.
Is it like, to use an analogy of like Marvel versus Capcom, or a modern kind of you're big into the I've seen some of your posters and images and stuff. Do you have any on your wall right there? I think, is it somewhere near
Let's see.
there? Yeah, so you're big into the
Yes.
superhero stuff. There's always competition to one up. Is Venom better than what is his name? Why did I bring up Venom? I loved the images of Venom, by the way. Spider-Man and
Spider-Man, yeah.
X-Men and the whole nine. Like, they're always trying to outdo each other, and the competition of the deities is in a sense the same way. Where it's almost like what John Dominic Crossan said to a Muslim scholar, and I brought this up before, but they were debating, not a Muslim scholar, but he might have been just a Muslim who was trying to say Muhammad's the way, the whole nine. And he said, if your guy was around in the 1st century and he was not claiming to be a son of God, a better son of God, we probably wouldn't even know who he is, because the game at the time was son of God or sons of God. And of course, we know in the 7th century, that game has played differently. Well, if you go back into the ancient Near Eastern world, if someone goes, our God's so powerful and so beyond, he's immaterial, he doesn't even have a body, they'd probably look at you and go, your God doesn't even exist then, because in their models, they had no conception at the time of immateriality and these notions. So they're working within, is what you're saying. So that brings me back to the perverted claim that has been thrown at these academics, such as yourself or Francesca and such. Why are we saying in Isaiah 6 or any of these other places, these euphemisms could be about God's penis? And or sexuality of the deity? Is that a common theme among the non-Israelite deities?
It is. In fact, in the Ugaritic literature, there's an interesting story. The Birth of the Gracious Gods is the name of this story. And we have El strolling along the beach, and there are 2 women, and he sees him. And then it says his hand grew as large as the sea. And the hand, the yad, is a euphemism for the genitals. And then there's intercourse. They are impregnated. They give birth to the gracious gods. And so this kind of stuff is represented frequently. And I actually have. I've shared this before a number of times on my channel. I don't know if you've seen it, but we have a drawing of God, Adonai, and his genitals. Have you seen this before?
Is this the one with the dangling parts right there, and she's sitting in a chair?
Somebody's sitting in a chair off to the side. Yeah.
I'd love to show everybody right now, because your drawing of it is amazing.
So this is an artifact discovered at Kuntilidaj, which was kind of a way station in the southern desert, and there was what's called a pithos, a large jar, and there were drawings and writing all over this, and it was shattered. And this is a fragment that's been put back together. I was going to share it, if
Please
that's
share
okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay. Unless, actually, you know what? I'll just send it to you, because I think you're a lot better at this than I am. I'm
just familiar with the software, so
yeah. Okay. Right there, and
everybody get ready.
And so this is a drawing that I did of this artifact. The artifact is kind of faded. It's not the easiest thing in the world to see, but my drawing tries to make it a lot clearer what's going on in the image. Okay,
I'm going to open this image, and we're going to actually do something. I'm going to do it a little better than what I did before when I showed that picture. That it's actually going to zoom in. We can actually look very closely at this. That's the goal. So we can actually, you're going to see much better. Is that coming through nice and clear? Let's see.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, that seems to be about the largest I can get it. Yeah. And then there we go. Okay, so what are we looking at here?
So this is one of the drawings and inscriptions from Pithos A from Kuntilidaj, and the inscriptions and the drawings have all been published. But we have these 2 figures here. One on the left is male, you can see in between the legs, and on the right we have a female lacking the hanger downs, and then we've got indications of breasts on the right as well. And then the figure playing the musical instrument in the background is highly debated, but is not really incredibly relevant to this discussion. But the inscription above talks about a person who is invoking blessings for, and then so the top line is the name, invoking blessings, and then the bottom line, which as you can see is written over top of the crown of the male figure, it says literally right there, to Adonai, of Shomron, or Adonai of Samaria, and to Asherah. And so we have a depiction, an inscription on top of this drawing that seems to represent Adonai and Asherah. Their arms are interlocked in the drawing. We have a male figure and a female figure. And the symbolism of these figures is patterned after what they refer to as Bes imagery. This is an Egyptian deity, and there were a number of deities that would kind of be almost like clothed in the symbolism of this Egyptian deity Bes. So there was a debate for a while over whether or not these are some other deities or if this is Bes, but I think the best case to make is that this is Adonai and Asherah, and they are just being assigned these symbols of Bes imagery. And I think the fact that the inscription is centered right over the crown of the male figure, that is the name, the Lamed, Yod-He, Vav-He, and then the name Asherah at the very end, I think makes it pretty clear.
So it's kind of funny. Today's live stream kind of overlaps yesterday's, where I have, we went a little bit into Asherah, of course, yesterday, but William G. Deaver actually uses the same image. It's a little different because you drew this version of it, but it's the same image, and he draws the same conclusions you are on this matter. And he thinks this is Yahweh and his Asherah. And I find that quite ironic. I think he also says that he thinks this is a woman. You can see the breast on the image. Oh, hold on. Let me pop this up here. On the right, how you drew on the far right, seated, there looks to be breast on that person there. And of course they're playing what you think is a lyre. So does he. But that this chair may also represent another image he had brought up, and I can't remember where that's from, but that it plays into this whole Asherah situation, being the divine goddess.
Yeah. And there's been an argument as well. There's a letter He on the end of Asherah's name, and so that's why a lot of translations say his Asherah, and because that could be a third masculine singular pronominal suffix, the possessive suffix. And people say, well, you don't have a pronominal suffix on a name, so that's probably a reference to a divine occultic image, an idol. And then there's another argument that that's the spelling that we always find in inscriptional Hebrew. It's Asherata rather than Asherah, and so that would still be a reference to the goddess. And so the scholars are somewhat split. Is this a reference to a divine image? Is this a reference to a goddess? I think the fact that we have a drawing of a female deity figure immediately under the image supports that at least whoever wrote this, and probably the people who saw it afterwards, would have understood it as a reference to the goddess and not as a reference to an Asherah pole or something like that, because we have on the other side of this pithos a representation of an Asherah pole, a tree with some ibexes on either side of it feeding. So we already have that represented elsewhere.
So just back to the Isaiah 6 thing, we aren't sure. We are not sure.
Not sure
what this ultimately means, what is actually going on, but it could very well just be the dangly parts of the God, which could be his penis, just like you're saying the hand that shot up to heaven. The euphemism for the hand is clearly in the context helping you understand they get pregnant, they bear children, sons of God, the whole nine. And this is obvious that the hand is the penis. Whereas in Isaiah 6, it is ambiguous because the context doesn't help necessarily drive that home, unless one wanted to interpret that the angels covering themselves, right? How does that help us possibly draw the conclusion that maybe this is talking about God's penis?
So I think the traditional interpretation is that, oh no, Isaiah is going to see our naughty bits, cover up, and that they're very, Victorian in that sense. And the interpretation that Francesca promotes, that I think is just as plausible, if not more so, is that they are ashamed. They're covering up their naughty bits because they do not compare, because Adonai is so much better endowed, and so they are covering up so as to cover their own shame. And so it's a bit of a play on words, and there are a few different plausible readings, but I think it's important that we allow these plausible readings some space and consider, well, what does it mean if the author was trying to suggest that Isaiah was looking at God's junk. What does that mean about the rest of the text written by this author? What does that mean about the theophany that Isaiah sees? And that's what Francesca is exploring in the book. It's not to say, hey, if you think it's anything else, you're wrong. It's saying, hey, let's think about what this would have meant if this is what was intended. And whether or not it's what was intended, beyond doubt, that's how it was understood anciently by at least some of the people encountering the text. And so I think it's important to give those interpretations some space and consider them if we want a better understanding of how this was all working anciently, rather than trying to reduce it all down so that it just makes us feel better about our own dogmas, which is what most of the rejections and accusations and complaints are about, is protecting dogmas.
Right. I see that a lot. And before we get into God walking with Adam or Abraham eating with Abraham and these clear places that sound like God has an actual body, he's a physical person in these situations. I want to get to that, but I want to make one mention for myself, and maybe you can tell me if that makes sense or not. And that is, when I started looking and talking to like Karakuni recently, I had heard about this in the past, but Karakuni is an Egyptologist I interviewed recently. Wonderful, amazing mind. I'm actually going to see her at the end of this month or beginning of May, doing 2 courses with her. We're going to dive into Osirian mythology and the narratives, their creation myths. It's going to be amazing. But she constantly brings up Isis and Osiris, the sexuality of this stuff, the cyclical nature of the deity. Then the list goes on, and there's so much sexuality from the obelisk representing the phallus. Like, there's so much of this, and I'm going, what in the world? This is very sexual. And then I find in Mesopotamia, we find the same stuff going on and on and on and on and on. And I'm going, very sexual, and it's everything so sexual. But then we get to this little place here in between these regions, and we're going to say, no, as you say, dogma. And that's why her book really, using kind of a heuristic approach to other mythologies and influential regions that we know impacted these people due to the Genesis mythology, going back to Mesopotamia and reacting to it and stuff, that it gave credence to that kind of interpretation for me in evaluating it the way you're describing.
Yeah, I think absolutely. The more we situate these texts within their original environment, the more surprising it would be that they are not taking sexuality as a salient sociocultural dimension of how deity works. And we have so many discussions in the Hebrew Bible about deity facilitating conception and facilitating childbirth and things like that. In the Hebrew Bible, at least, sex is something that is treated very transactionally, very casually in many cases. When you've got Abraham, Sarah's not working out. She goes, well, take my slave. Okay. And, and then that's where Ishmael comes from with Hagar, the enslaved girl. When you have Jacob, who's just, he's traveling, he's had a long day, and he's like, I could really use a prostitute right now. And then, he sees one, doesn't know it happens to be his daughter-in-law, doesn't know that she's about to, she's
Heck of a story.
Yeah, that's a great story as well. But, these things are treated pretty casually. And the notion that, well, God couldn't have anything to do with that, we can't think or talk about God in those terms, is just nonsensical. Now, again, we've had thousands of years to think about this, and people who curated these collections of texts also had hundreds of years to decide what they're going to leave in and what they're going to leave out. So I think if we could see all of the literature that the author of Isaiah 6 had in front of them, everything that influenced them, I think it's beyond a doubt that there would be more graphic, more sexually explicit discussions about God, as there are in all of the nations around Israel, and that over the centuries, a lot of that was weeded out. It was covered with euphemism, was reinterpreted, or it was just ignored as things became and particularly as we get into the Greco-Roman period. Once you get into the Greco-Roman period, you get this idea that sexual desire is something to be avoided, that it is something that, at least within the philosophical schools of thought, with Stoicism, with Pythagoreanism, and places like that, you have this idea that this is bad. We need to conquer this because this is just the machinations of the corrupt flesh, and so we need to overcome that. And then you get the celibacy ideology that we find is scattered around Matthew and Luke, and that we find in Paul. And so I think it's really that period probably when the last vestiges of the sexuality of God were probably weeded out, because we don't really have much from, we don't have anything. Well, we have 2 pieces of text representing about 5 total verses from before the Greco-Roman period. And that's it. And that's from the Ketef Hinnom silver scrolls, which just have a tiny little part of the priestly blessing that date to about 600 BCE. The next available text of any kind that we have all dates to the Greco-Roman period and after. And so they're curating this and they're weeding it out. And so we are only seeing what the editors and redactors of the Greco-Roman period wanted us to see.
Right. Dead Sea Scrolls would fall into that, and all the above. What's interesting, just to make one comment about the sexuality, when you get to the Greek schools in philosophy, is they couldn't imagine the divinities committing sexual acts. And so Plato's like, no, gods don't have passions like we do. And so they cannot have sex. And so when they find bad stuff from their ancient Homer narratives about Zeus raping a woman, they're like, that can't happen. They have found a philosophical way in which made the most sense to them to divorce the deities from that and say that's an allegory or it means something else. And so you find that end up happening where when the births of some of these people, these heroes or these sons of God, like Plutarch writes about the birth of Plato. And when he does, he says that the gods pneuma, he uses the same Greek words, dynamos and pneuma, from Luke that we hear about the overshadowing of Mary. He uses those for the god Zeus, or was it Apollo? I think it's Apollo. I could be wrong, over Plato. So it's not a sexual union, just like someone would look at the union between what God overshadows Mary and they go, that wasn't sexual. It's the same thing. And so it's almost like the elite thinkers, the philosophers, were doing exactly what you're saying. And the common folk, the folk religion, may still have vestiges of the sex and whatnot happening because they're not the intelligentsia, as you say.
Yeah, and you see this in some of the later Christian writers, Origen, for instance, talking about anthropomorphism, the idea that God has a body, saying, this is rejected by the philosophers. So we can't think that. We have a story of, I'm gonna totally forget the name, but there's a monk out in Egypt that somebody is sent to go take care of this monk who's spreading this idea that God has a body, and the official goes out there and the monk explains that the scriptures make it clear that God has a body, and then the official kind of explains how philosophically this cannot be and this is not allowed to be, and then the text says the monk cries out that I have no one left to pray to. I don't know who it is I'm praying to,
because God doesn't have a body.
Yeah, because now he doesn't have an image of God to focus on. And this is just a fundamental feature of the human experience. We need something to focus our attention on. And in the book, I talk about how divine images are one of the ways that we express this. And we do this even today. Headstones. People go to cemeteries and talk to headstones. It's like we want a piece of material media to help us focus our attention and say, I'm directing my discourse, my comments at something so that this will help me feel like I'm communicating with the deceased loved one. And divine images are doing the exact same thing. And the Bible ultimately fills that role throughout much of human history. That is the locus of divine presence and divine agency. And that's why some people think, you've got to treat the Bible differently than any other book. You're not allowed to do certain things with it, or you have to handle it a certain way. And this is all reflecting this idea that we need some kind of material locus of divine presence. God's body's gone. God's divine images are gone. but we still have the book. And so the book fills that role for a lot of folks. And there's some scholar, and I talk about it a bit in my book, but there's also other scholarship that talks about the Bible as an icon, because as human beings, it's hard to keep all these abstractions in place and to focus on them and to call them up efficiently and conveniently. And so we like to have something physical that we can use instead.
Right.
And that's what this monk was so distraught about. You're taking that away from me. I don't know what it is I'm worshiping anymore. I can't focus on who I'm talking to when I'm praying.
Right. That's so powerful. It makes me think of Islam with the Quran, and of course, early on, it was really the not necessarily the book. From the Islamic scholars I talked to, it was the recitation and knowing the memory and kind of saying. And the recitation, still, we have that, right? It's still a remnant within Islamic theology, but it has kind of really become the book. And what in some circles, it's still the recitation that's most important. But there's like, we have this book, and that to them is kind of that iconography for them to attach to the imageless, all powerful, unimaginable deity. But there was that battle throughout the centuries. I've interviewed other scholars on this when we got into the relic that we find of the Jesus relic of him in the shroud, and how it's one of the latest shrouds to be made. And it's still around, but people think this goes back to Jesus. I've even think Gary Habermas tried to use an apologetic like this or something. And it's like, I talked to the historian who literally is 100 feet from where they house it. And he said, historically, not only does it only pop up in the 12th, 13th century, but like there were many people who said this was not real. Like, people made this up. And so you got good reasons to think, and it's one of the later ones. It's not even the earliest shrouds that were being made, for iconography to attach and give them something to latch onto Jesus and the God of Jesus and such with. So it's interesting. I want to get us back on track a little, but this was so important to get that out of the way. And that is like God's body, right? He's physical. Adam, when I used to read this as a Christian who became a Reformed Calvinist and whatnot, I'd go, this is anthropomorphic language. God's just trying to relate to you in a narrative. That was my interpretive framework. He didn't really like literally walk. And if he did, it was really Jesus. It was a Christos,
right.
like it was like Jesus before showing up in the Old Testament. So God walks with Adam. He eats with Abraham. Can you go into some of these examples?
Yeah, these are, and a wonderful book on this is called Esther, or it's by Esther Hamori, and it's called When Gods Were Men. And it goes into what's called the Ish theophany. So this is the theophany that explicitly uses the Hebrew word Ish, man, to refer to God. And so Abraham is one of those examples. And yeah, this is how deities were represented in the earliest periods. They looked, walked, talked like men. They, well, apart from those that looked, walked, and talked like women, but at least the God of Israel was represented as male. And you look in Genesis 2 and 3, this is a very anthropomorphic representation of deity. That's why many scholars believe that this is the earlier creation account, because God creates the the earth and then the heavens. And God creates by getting their hands dirty in the mud. And that's how they create Adam, and they're walking in the garden. And so this is a more anthropomorphic idea of God. So this is before we've engaged in this kind of rhetorical combat of one-upmanship with the other nations. But once we're on the other side of that, you have the priestly authors coming in, and they are correcting a lot of that earlier creation account with this deity who creates the heavens first and then the earth, and does not get their hands dirty, but creates by divine fiat, and does not have to correct their translation. Because in Genesis 2, this deity is like, makes man, then is like, needs something. Let's make all these animals. That didn't do it. Let's make a woman, and is updating everything. And then in the priestly creation account, they create by divine fiat, and God saw that it was good. Everything is good right from the start. So that creation account is correcting a lot of what the earlier creation account was doing. And so, but they're not picturing a completely anti-anthropomorphic or immaterial deity. They're kind of moving this deity into the heavens out of view. So it's more of an unseen anthropomorphic deity.
That's the priestly. The
Yeah,
priestly
this is
version is
the priestly conceptualization. Yeah, and people, a lot of scholars are eager to read that as the immaterial, anti-anthropomorphic
right.
idea, but I would say that is anachronistic. And then Abraham, yeah, we've got in Genesis 18, Abraham's sitting there, and three men walk up, and it calls them. Calls God the Ish, and then suddenly Abraham is talking with Adonai. And we have a number of instances where it seems like God is personally, physically visiting and interacting with people. Most of them, Genesis 18 is a bit of an exception. Most of them get altered by editors. And that's in my book as well. The angel of the Lord, when the angel of the Lord visits Hagar in Genesis 16, the angel of the Lord visits Abraham in Genesis 22, Moses in Exodus 3, Gideon in Judges 6, Manoach and his wife in Judges 13. All of these have this entity that is physically interacting with them that is alternatively referred to as God or as the angel. And what I argue is that these were early stories about God directly and physically interacting with humans, God themselves. And then somewhere along the way, somebody wrote Malach in to create this construct phrase, Malach Adonai, the angel of, the messenger of Adonai. And this is in this period when we're starting to say, look, if our God is this gigantic being that sits in the heavens as their throne and has the earth as their footstool, they can't sit down at Manoach's campfire and eat some of his food. And so we write in Malach, and now we have suddenly created this intermediary being that is going to be mediating God's presence and identifying as God themselves. When people talk about Jesus identifying as God, they're like, well, they couldn't have said it any clearer. It's like, yes, they could have, like the angel does in Exodus 3:6. I am the God of your father. But we look in Josephus's retelling of that story, we look in the Vulgate, the angel is not there at all. It's because that angel was a later addition to the narrative. It only occurs in verse 2. And it's just one word that was just stuck in there because people were beginning to be uncomfortable with the idea of God in their human nature interacting directly with people. And the Genesis 18 is the one exception where we have these three individuals, and it's kind of murky exactly what's going on there and who these folks are. But Abraham at the end of the chapter is talking with God themselves, and then the next chapter begins with the two angels entering Sodom. So long history of concern with this idea that God is the size and shape and consistency and texture of a human, but it's very clearly there. And I'd highly recommend Esther Hamori's book, When Gods Were Men.
I just added it to my MythVision recommended. It's kind of pricey because it is a scholarly monograph.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they can get up there.
Yeah, I mean, I want to read it. So anyone who has the funds and is willing, go check it out. I want to make a few comments before we move on. I want to talk about Jacob wrestling with God too, and what's going on with the euphemism there, and Noah's flood with the rainbow. But before I get to those, remind me. I want to make one comment. In Francesca's book, she points out in Egypt, there's a God who uses the potter's will to create man. Literally the same idea and will in which man was made from clay, what we see in the Bible. Here is, I'm not going to say intertextuality, at least inner idea of some form within this framework. And it might be intertextuality, but it kind of connects again, like, hey, Egypt's got all the sexuality and corporeality to the deities, et cetera, and they're using the same concept here in the biblical text. I think it lends credibility or weight to what we're talking about here today. Also, they're rationalizing, it seems. Like we all do it. Christians do it today. Go ahead. What do you got there?
The image of God in the Garden of Eden. This is a discussion by Catherine McDowell. This was a revised version of her Harvard dissertation. The subtitle is The Creation of Humankind in Genesis 2:5 through 3:24 in light of Mispi, Pitpi, and Whippet, or Rituals of Mesopotamia and Ancient Egypt, which is another excuse me, another discussion of some of the parallels between Mesopotamia and Egypt and the biblical accounts of creation. But here the idea is that the creation of humanity using clay reflects the idea of creating a divine image and using these rituals of creations of divine images in Mesopotamia and Egypt. So in addition to the idea of this deity who creates humanity on the potter's turntable, it also resonates with this idea of creating the divine image. So the idea that God created humanity in our likeness, in our image, is reflected as well. So I apologize for interrupting.
No,
but
I told you at the beginning, you're going to have to, because I love that. I'm thankful that you're interrupting. I want you to. It's not rude. Trust me. I want to learn. I just added that one as well to the list.
Okay.
So there's an Amazon affiliate link. Amazon doesn't pay much, but it helps at the end of the day to add gas to the freaking gas in the car or whatever. If you go through that link and never buy any books, keep in mind it helps MythVision. But I also have a recommended MythVision list of books there too. Dan, your mind, I love your mind. Oh, what's this?
And also this one, I mentioned this earlier. This is edited by Francesca, Life and Death, Social Perspectives on Biblical Bodies. And so this is about, this talks about materiality, power, extended sociality, different aspects of corporeality and bodies in the Bible. And so my paper is the very last paper in the volume that's about forming divine bodies. But if people are interested in materiality and corporeality in ancient Israel, having to do with humanity as well as having to do with the divine, this is another great edited volume by Francesca. So okay, I'm done interrupting.
No, get your debit card, whip your bank out, because some of these cost some money. But I added them to the list, so there's used ones for $65. So I'm looking right now on Amazon. Just saying that the more pricey are hardcovers $105, and these scholarly books, man, it's what they do. Jacob, I loved this story as a kid.
Yeah,
and Jacob wrestled with God. And I mean, even when I wrestled in high school, it brought that experience to my interpretation. And I'm like, I know what went into wrestling. And I mean, like, I still have a little bit of cauliflower. Is it this year? It's this year. You see how like it's a little wrinkled up. Anyway, a little bit of cauliflower, but I only wrestled for 1 year in my high school, and it was tough stuff. So I'm like, obviously I have this image of what wrestling is, and I can't imagine it was identical to what we're reading, but they're fighting, they're struggling, something's going on with Jacob and God reached into his hip, and I'm thinking like he dislocated his hip like that. I was like, and next thing you know, he's limping off going, man, he kicked my ass. But Francesca like blew my mind and went, that's actually probably a euphemism. And I'm going, what is going on with Jacob wrestling God here? Is there something more going on?
So that's another story where it's a little ambiguous, and I think we gotta let both of these stories kind of marinate and figure out what the significance of each is, because it talks at the end about how that's the story where it says at the very end that's why we don't eat that ligament to this very day or something like that. And so some folks would say this was added as an etiology for some kind of dietary practice. And I'm reading right now Jonathan Adler's wonderful book on the invention of Judaism, where he says that is really outside of Leviticus and the Torah's dietary prohibitions. That is the only story within the narrative portions of the entire Hebrew Bible that mentions any dietary restriction. And so and it's not listed anywhere in the dietary restrictions of the Torah. But so that may be an etiology for what's going on there.
Like they're trying to cover up something, maybe, in a way.
They're trying to say, whenever there are practices that people do, and in ritual studies they refer to these as causally opaque. We don't know why we do this. We don't know what it accomplishes, but we do it anyway. The people will try to come up with explanations. And so an etiology is saying, oh, we do this because there's this story and that's what happened. And so because of that, we do this. And those stories usually have nothing to do with how that practice originally came about. So Jonathan explains that is probably an etiological story to account for why that part of the hip or that area was not consumed. But yeah, at the same time, that region is frequently used as a euphemism for the genitals when it talks about the thigh, the leg, the hip. It's really meaning, you know, around the corner from there. And so, and
I mean, we use bosom even to kind of,
yeah.
yeah.
And these are, you know, the genitals are a pretty important part of the social body at the time, because reproduction was so important to everybody. We're living in a time where survival is not guaranteed, not even remotely. And so you want to be able to reproduce. And this is why you have this law, for instance, that's, I think it's in Leviticus, where if some people are, if a woman is fighting and she grabs some dude's junk, you know, they drop the hammer,
Yeah,
because
that's ridiculous.
that's a big deal. And so there is symbolic significance to someone wrestling and someone grabbing the junk. That's a no-no. That is off limits in wrestling back then. So I think that that probably comes into play as well. And I think it's important that we think about what the significance of that could be. So again, this could be playing multiple different roles. This could be functioning in a few different ways. But this is another story that most of the people who talk about this story these days think of this not as God, but as an angel. And it doesn't say angel anywhere in the story at all. It says, Jacob says at the end, I have seen God face to face. But we have way back in Hosea, we have this story, and it says that he fought with the angel and prevailed. But when you look at the text, we miss out on this handy little etiology. Vayasar el malach. If you take el as the preposition, as the kind of pointing to the direct object, malach, you miss out on Vayasar el as an etiology for the name Israel. God, you know, it's fight with God, or El prevails, or El contends, or something like that. But I have argued that an editor at some point added the word malach there in Hosea as well, which produces the idea that Jacob was fighting with an angel, and that becomes the interpretive lens for reading that story in Genesis for 2,000 plus years. So again, some folks somewhere along the way have decided they were uncomfortable with God being in that position, and particularly with Jacob handing it to God for most of this fight, until God says, you know what, I'm going below the belt, and
knees him in the balls. It's over, man. You're not doing this anymore. That's so,
the future
again,
is now, old man.
Yeah, I use this phrase a lot with my channel, and I've been doing a lot lately. Like, that's so human. That's so human. And I like finding out about that. You know, at one point when I was just really philosophical and theological, I'll use the term because there's kind of an overlap there in my way of thinking biblically. I was impressed with the omniscient, all-knowing, like even in the Calvinist circles, like superlapsarianism or infralapsarianism, and did God like decree all things, and like that was all cool, but it was all like, as I've said, it kind of overlaps into that mental masturbation phase of like just speculating in your mind and trying to have fun in your head. To me, it's really cool to get down and dirty and find out the human fingerprints to all of this. And that's why I'm so impressed with this, with seeing the God that I once thought was this thing become what looks, and historically, like the best setting in which this deity is, look this way. It's actually cool.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the baggage of the taboo of like condemnation that comes with it, and all the things that we once would think about this divinity. And if we started thinking about this divinity that way, Francesca actually made me kind of fall in love with the research and the study. Even though this God has archaic features, it's still like studying Osiris or studying some other divinity where you're like, this is cool. This is cool. We've got the baggage attached to this, what I would say, an ideological war going on, that legitimately kind of discourages people who are not identifying as particular people within that identity group, whether they be Christian, Jews, etc. And I'm trying with this channel to give people the inspiration to get into this and to enjoy this for the historical research as much as I can, even though I am combating somewhat. I really am trying to do that, Dan. I don't know if you noticed that, but that's one of my goals.
Yeah. I think you do a wonderful job. I think that your passion for the material is right there, and people can see. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Last one on that. And then if you have any, I want to hear yours before we get to Q&A. That is the rainbow. I was told that the rainbow is in the shape of a bow and arrow. It has the U shape. Of course, it has the many colors. This is God's covenant sign. I will never flood you again. Is there any contextual, heuristic, Mesopotamian backdrop to think the bow, the rainbow, represents a symbol of the phallus?
There are places where that seems to be the case in broader Semitic imagery. I think it's probably, if we read that here, I think it is a bit of a double entendre. I think, again, we're being, the author could be intentionally ambiguous. It's certainly possible and plausible. That one is, of all the arguments, I would say that's the one that probably requires the most suspension of disbelief, but certainly not outside the realm of plausibility. But I would say if it is there, it is part of kind of a dual presentation of the imagery there.
I'm wondering how the bow represents that. Like, in what way does that? I can get like the hand, right? Where we talk about El's hand shoot up to heaven. The context is there, and you're admitting it could be weak. It's a weaker example. It's not
I don't think it's as clear, but the bow is a symbol in that. What is a bow facilitating? It's sending some kind of long object into something to penetrate in something. Yeah. And so in that sense, it is the facilitator of that penetration. And so it does not directly represent, I mean, you're not thinking of, hopefully, an enormous phallus with string tied on each end of it. It is a little more indirectly symbolic. So it is more the whole conceptual package of what a bow and arrow does that contributes to that idea.
I have a friend, Stephen Nelson, who's like Greek guru, loves the language. He literally told me in Greece, the men who go to battle, oftentimes they might have wives, and the wives have, their conception was when the phallus penetrated the vagina, they were no longer virgins, but the men were still virgins until they were cut or pierced in battle. So they were considered not men until they actually get wounded in war in some way, shape, or form, according to like kind of a, I don't know, like today we have ways of thinking, oh, that's manly or whatever the social structure is. In Greece, it was like that. So I could see why a bow piercing something could represent a warlike scenario, represents the penis. And in one of her chapters, Francesca talks about Donald Trump and North Korea with the button. That was such a great opening.
Yeah.
We have you have a button? You have a bomb? Well, guess what? Mine's is bigger and it's badder. So I'll press and there's like a locker room talk about whose junk is bigger.
Yeah.
About real bombs, though.
And I think that's that's an illustration of how almost anything can be taken over as a symbol or a euphemism for the phallus, or at least manhood. This, you could take anything. There's nothing inherently sexual about a button, but once you say mine's bigger, you are sexualizing that, and you are using that to compare your manhood to somebody else. So the fact that we can do that with a nuclear launch button shows that to say, nah, they weren't doing that with a bow and arrow. That doesn't make any sense. It just means you're not, you can't imagine the social structures that could contribute to that,
especially
conceptualization.
A patriarchal social structure. I mean, they're men, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I use the word min, not saying people aren't men today, but it's like I grew up with that. My father
Yeah.
was a Green Beret in the Special Forces. And let me
Mhm.
tell you, we heard it every day. And I still hear it. He lives right down the street from me. And he's head high, chest out, alpha male, like,
Yeah.
and so I know exactly what you're saying. And it's always some euphemism in his thing about how manly and tough he is. And let me tell you, well, we were downrange. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh God, another story, a war story. So any specific examples from you might want to highlight before we get to Q&A?
No, I think we've talked about most of them. But I think I saw some great questions
Okay.
fly by there. So let's take a look.
Thank you for all of this. Usual, thank you for the super sticker. I really appreciate you showing love, always jumping in the chat. And everybody who's been pressing 1, you're letting the algorithm gods know that we exist, and they're going to help encourage promoting this. Thank you. Brave New History. Do we see formless, immaterial gods outside of space and outside of time and space anywhere in history? Was that idea as absurd to them as physical gods are to us now? I think he actually sent this when you were answering this question. We had
Really?
Yeah. So
yeah, it's something that develops, and I think the Greco-Roman philosophical framework is what makes that possible, at least the way we think about being outside time and space today. There are probably other examples that would kind of approximate that, but because we operate with a very kind of neo-Greco-Roman philosophical outlook today, I think that's the origin of that idea.
So you can thank non-Christians for helping influence. Anyway, I digress. Sentinel Apologetics, Rob, ontologically, bodied God equals Jesus never existed. Wink.
Well, if the idea is that Jesus is the embodiment of God, then I guess you would say there's no need for that if God already had a body independent of Jesus. But yeah, I don't know that there's any relevance to the mythicist argument based on that.
Yeah, I don't either. Thank you for the super chat. Doc Pluromena, thoughts on the concept of God's kavod or kavod as first articulated in Ezekiel being the model of the Gnostic anthropos, the son of man in Jewish apocalypticism, and the heavenly man in Pauline theology.
So I think the kavod is a proxy, is a stand-in for the divine presence and the divine body. And there was, and now I'm forgetting the name of the book, but there was a scholar named David Aaron. This is an older book. Let's see if I can, not a ROM. And it was called Biblical Ambiguities, Metaphor, Semantics, and Divine Imagery. And Aaron, and that's Brill, so that's going to be like $1 billion. But Aaron talks in there about the kavod in the earliest layers as being God's body, literally physically God's body. When it talks about God's body, it talks about the kavod. And then that kind of being renegotiated into kind of a separate proxy for God's body, turning into this idea of glory, which has a visual aspect to it in some usage, and another usage has more of an abstract kind of idea of someone's reputation or something like that. And I talk in the book a bit about kavod in Ezekiel as being a way to refer to God's presence, God's physical presence, but in a separable sense. It's not God's self, but it is this kavod, this material proxy representation of deity. Now, that being the origin of some of these later ideas, I think it certainly plays a role, but I don't think it is the proximate cause of those things. I think those things are being taken up and utilized within these separate conceptual frameworks, particularly the Gnostic one, which is taking on these kind of middle Platonic and Neoplatonic ideas of the Yalta boat and the the ions and all these different things, which is very, very, very different from what Ezekiel is talking about. So wouldn't be surprised if there's some influence, but the relationship is pretty thin, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. Camille Gregor in the house. Does male and female, he created them, in Genesis 1:27 function as an explanation of what in the image of Elohim means? I.e., does the author say that some Elohim were male and some female?
So I think that is a possible reading of that. I don't think it's so the let us make sentence, that's a cohortative. So that means it's a first person plural command or imperative. So that is widely understood to be a vestigial reference to the divine council, which was overwhelmingly made up of male deities in the ancient Southwest Asian perception, but there were also female deities. And so I absolutely think that male and female, he made them, could be a reflection of creating males in the image of male deities and females in the image of female deities. We don't really have enough data to be able to say anything beyond that. Yeah, that's plausible. We don't see that discussion about humanity in the image of male deities and female deities in other literature. So it would be great if we were one day able to find data that helped us fill out that picture a little more. But at this point, I would say it's possible, even plausible, but can't really say much more than that.
It actually overlaps the question I had yesterday. Was like, was Asherah part of the council, there with Yahweh in the creation? And so are they co-creating, so to speak, here? But
so that's an idea that a lot of people have wondered about. The divine council in the Ugaritic literature are referred to as the 70 sons of Athirat, of Asherah. And so the idea seems to be that the patriarch and their consort are the high deities. The second tier of deities is made up of all of their children. And so, yes, and most of these would have been, to the degree that there were any traditions about where those other deities came from, one of the traditions would have been they were conceived by the parent deities, El and Athirat at Ugarit. And so it's likely that is to some degree what was going on in early Israel. And we see that in Deuteronomy 32:8-9 with Elyon dividing up the nations according to the number of the children of God. And then Adonai is among them, receiving Israel as their inheritance.
Powerful stuff. Thank you. Constellation Pegasus, the Bible students, Jehovah's Witness. Taught for years, Jehovah's throne was on Pleiades constellation. He resided there in four-dimensional space, our universe. Why not have a body and wife, junk and all?
I agree. That makes for a much more exciting creative period. Makes for things don't get as boring or as lonely.
It's relatable, right?
Yeah.
So the making deity so unrelatable. While I think that in many of the Muslim circles I've interacted, they think that it saves God, right? So like they can make God unfalsifiable and all this cool stuff, and it's like unimaginable and whoa, you can have this like mental stimulation. But God is so much more relatable when you're reading things what we're talking about, and that's what I like better. Like the guy reading, praying, and then you take the image away. I don't know what to do anymore. Like I have no relation.
Well, and I talk about this a bit in the book. Our concepts of deity grow out of what is most intuitive and most relatable to us. And the further they get away from us, the more we need social structures in place that can curate and enforce them. Because it's one thing to say, I think my deceased dad is visiting me. Like, take away our contemporary skepticism, and that is a very intuitive thing for people to think about.
Right.
And a lot of people are going to agree on that. But now, if you say, my deceased dad is immaterial and he does not exist in time or in space, but he communicated with me without words and without, like, that is less intuitive. It is counterintuitive.
Right.
And that is the kind of thing that is not going to that's not going to just bubble to the surface of human cognition all around the world. That is something that somebody's going to go, what? But if you have a social structure in place that now says, this is how we are thinking about it, and by the way, we can sentence you to death. We can exile you. We are going, your livelihood, your paycheck is going to depend on you agreeing with this. Suddenly, everybody's happy to agree with it. And so the further away the concept of God gets from intuitive things that a lot of people can agree on because they taste good, they sound intuitive, the further away that gets, the more you need social structures and social pressures in place to be able to curate, maintain, and enforce them. And so that's why you don't have these just totally counterintuitive concepts of God until you have a church or a society with a very strong social structure. And so you can't have, oh, well, this is a contradiction, but that's just a mystery. And guess what? You're going to believe it until you have the Catholic Church. And so you could not have ancient Israel. You could not have the hypostatic union and the mystery of the hypostatic union, because everybody would be like, that's dumb. And there would not be this social structure there that could say, well, you are now exiled, and then actually carry through with it. So I think that's something we tend to lose in a lot of these discussions about God as this very abstract conceptual being, is you don't have that unless you have social structures that exercise power over people.
It's going to sound funny, but you made me think of the movie Equilibrium with Christian Bale. And they are anti-art. They're like, the whole society has to take like a daily dose of some methadone type of substance that really numbs them from experiencing the world around them. And then one day his wife was even stopped taking the medicine, and he had to turn her in, and she was put to death. During the movie, stuff takes place where his own children, he has to hide it from them, thinking they don't know. And he himself stops taking it, starts to see things. It made me think that the social structure, everybody was doing the same thing, and anti-art, and they were all on the same page. Because if you're all in the same boat doing the same things, maybe you can do dumb stuff in a way. I mean, it made me think of that. So I'm not saying that everything that they're thinking in abstract terms is dumb. I'm just saying that everyone in a social society can come up with horrible ideas, ethically speaking, and we can find ways to just justify it with our concepts that we've created. And anyway,
and this is one of the reasons that I get a little annoyed when people talk about how dangerous religion is. And it's like, no, religion is an example of a social identity that can have very strong bonds. And that's the danger. Any social identity that can have strong bonds and that can make people believe in something larger than themselves, even if it's the state or, anything like that, is capable of incentivizing people to do things up to and including giving their own life or taking other people's lives. And so it's really, the root of that is social identity and thinking, I have to do this, or if I do this, things will go better for my family, or things like that. So that's an interesting example you bring up. But yeah, social identities are at the root of a lot of that.
Reminded me of the Sam Harris debate with Jordan Peterson about the real issue. He said was dogmatism. And then, and of course, he says he thinks that religion in that social structure, he sees how normal individuals became radical ISIS jihadist. And he wants to put that blame on the religion. And don't get me wrong, that particular model, of course, is horrible. But he wanted to say dogmatism is the root, because Peterson rightly brings up the state and non-religious type of functions like that. It gets down into some deep stuff that we're talking about here, but yeah, you're on the money, I think. Steve, thank you for the super chat. How many views of Shekinah are there in the Old Testament?
So I don't think we have that word in the Old Testament. I think that comes up in later Jewish literature. But if you're talking about separable proxy personified representations of deity, there are a bunch. The kavod is one. I think the messenger of Adonai becomes one. You've got the name, which is a big one. You've got the spirit, which is one. There are a bunch, and I talk about those in the book as well. And I talk about how I'm not talking about several of them. I address a handful of them. and leave some out. But I think for the best discussion, yeah, the book goes into quite a bit of detail on this idea of separable, the partible and permeable person, and how the Bible represents deity as being partible into all these different loci of agency and power and authority and presence and things like that.
Vote. And the book is right there, just so you know. It's free in the description. You can get the downloaded version, or you can get the hard copy on Amazon. We're gonna blast through these here, and then we'll sum up and see how many subscribers we got you today, and then check in with me over the next couple of days. I want to see if it grew. Wade Rogers, thank you for the super chat. Jeremiah 1:9. The Lord reached out his hand, touched my mouth, and said, I put my words in your mouth. And how many times did Yahweh speak out loud to Moses and others? Indicates a mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree there.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's an interesting thing to think about, like, for people who think God speaks even today, but they have this concept of outside space and time. It's almost like when we talk about how silly it is that a snake might talk, and we're like, come on, they don't even have vocal cords. Like, we're rationalizing, trying to make sense of how a snake can talk. How can God talk if he doesn't have a mouth?
Yeah, and that frequently that is rationalized as just the limits of human language, that we have to speak figuratively about God. And that brings up the fact that, hey, if you can't communicate about how God is, you can't share the same idea about God. We can only agree on things we can communicate about. And so these days we've gotten these philosophical ideas of how abstract God is, but they did not have the same ideas anciently. And to say, well, that's just the limits of human imagination. Well, that is where you must place the limit of their ability to share an idea about God as well.
Thank you. There's so many good things in this episode. I hope you watch it back, everybody. Teresa W., just wondering if Dan is doing a MythVision course. Really enjoy his shorts, but also like more depth. I want to give you a plug and say you are doing courses. So you do lectures, you do courses, and people can donate at whatever level they're able to be able to take your courses. I would love to do a course with you at some point. But we'll have to talk about that and figure out what way that'd be possible.
Yeah, I do my own online courses right now. I just did one last night, talked about how we got the biblical canon. And then my next one will come up on Thursday, May 11th, and that will be on the Divine Council. So that'll be a 1-hour presentation on the Divine Council, and then I do 30 minutes of a Q&A afterward. And so if you want more info on that, like Derek said, it's a pay what you like basis. So as long the minimum donation is $1, and you can go to McClellan.org, and that's McClellan spelled like my username, MAKLELAN.org. And you can find information on how to register for that if you are interested.
I have the links, several links down in the description. And if you just hunt him down and see his link tree is also on Twitter. There's so many links, you can't miss it. So I'm sure you'll find it and get on board.
Yeah, and the website, I also have the previous courses that I've done are also for sale on there. I did a course on Asherah, the Israelite goddess, did a course on homosexuality in the Bible, did a course on Adonai and El as separate deities and how they were conflated, done a course on Satan in the Bible. So there are a handful of different courses if you're interested.
I really appreciate that. We got another one here. Constellation Pegasus said, Satan argued with Jehovah in his throne room. If Jehovah has to sit, he must have a body.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a handful of representations of the divine council. We have in Psalm 82, we have the gods we have Adonai takes his stand amidst the gods and judges among the gods. We have 1 Kings 22, Micaiah says, I saw the Lord sitting on his throne surrounded by the spirits, and and then God asked for somebody to go lie to Ahab to deceive him to his death. So also a different representation of God. But yeah, we've got a number of representations of God as entirely anthropomorphic. We don't really have anything anywhere in the Bible that says God is not human shaped and sized. Even in the New Testament, what is Stephen, right before he's martyred, what does he see? He sees Jesus at the right hand of God on enthroned. And so 100% anthropomorphic corporeal conceptualization of deity all the way through the Bible.
Thank you for that. And Joe Trapp with the super sticker, I really appreciate it. So as we're getting to the end here, I do want to ask you, if you don't mind, why someone like me, I mean, this doesn't say that the deity doesn't exist, of course. This is a personal question of my own. And just to get your thoughts, maybe you could say, I can understand that, or you can ignore it altogether. It doesn't matter. But for me, I've been making the point, and some people wanted to recently be jabbing at me, saying that I'm lying or being dishonest. And I did a little video on it. Didn't have to, but I did it on purpose because I want people to see the interactions that go on. Oftentimes people have no clue what I have to deal with. Just
was
like
that clickbaity thing you did just the other day? I'm lying or something like that.
They wrote that I'm being dishonest, and it's an actual person on Facebook that I'm friends with who wrote me this because they did not like the video "This is War." They felt that I have a one-sided channel and I don't bring on all the apologists, as if Christian apologists don't have enough clout on the internet and don't get enough attention. I'm supposed to now stop what I'm doing with the academics I talk to and just give William Lane Craig a pedestal, or all of these other academics that are actually trying to, I almost say, axe grind to prove the stuff is true. And I tend to axe grind the opposite direction. I want to fight against what I think is out there because I don't think it's the case. But when I looked at this deity and I said, this is very much like the other ancient Near Eastern deities, for me, it solidifies that this is an age-old thing, that human conception and our perception of the divine in the natural world, this is how they viewed it. The fact that this God had to evolve and change so much, for me, really nails down some humanity to this whole thing that I think is bigger than they're giving credit for. And they'll say, well, no. Divine revelation God's revealing himself even more over time. And you can come up with any model to make this the case. But they said it was a non sequitur. And I simply am saying, look, I don't buy that this divinity is real, just like I don't think Osiris or any other god. If we need to be fair then. Like, they also exist, or at least seem to exist in the minds of their believers and followers and such. So they're very comfortable in their philosophical worldview, like coming up with conceptions of the deity and whatnot. And they said, well, this doesn't prove God doesn't exist at all. Even if you can nail this God down to an anthropomorphic corporeal deity in the ancient Near East, so what? That doesn't prove God doesn't exist. And I said, I agree, because how can I prove that God doesn't exist? I can't, even if I identify, pigeonhole me, if you will, as an atheist. I, however, think that there's good reasons to think that men conceptualized this deity. And technically, the deity is a reflection of man, not we are images of the deity. My opinion. They thought this was some non sequitur, me trying to say, and I think that deity, they've kind of like thrown that God out the window with their modern conceptions.
Yeah.
The end of the book of Francesca's book is literally like the funeral of God in a way. Your God is no longer your God. Biblically, you have a different perception and interpretation. So what do you think in conclusion of that whole thing that I'm kind of expressing here?
I think you're absolutely right. In fact, a book that I'm working on right now, I'm not sure what we're going to call it right now. The working title is Negotiating Adonai. And the idea is that the depiction of God, the conceptualization of God, is something that is constantly being negotiated, and every renegotiation must take into account what came before, and then that renegotiation then provides a different picture for the next generation to negotiate with, and it is always being done within a context with certain rhetorical needs and goals and exigencies. And so the apologetic idea that what I get frustrated with the notion of you can't prove it. You can't prove much of anything at all. I don't know if people are aware just how little we consider or how little of what we consider our human knowledge is actually proven. But just being able to gin up the tiniest little sliver of not impossible does not achieve a whole ton, particularly when a lot of these folks would like to say that, Mormonism is proven false. Well, if you can say, or if you think it means something to say you can't prove God doesn't exist, you also can't prove Mormonism is false. You can't prove Islam is false. You can't prove Heaven's Gate is false. As long
I
as
can't prove Jesus didn't rise from the dead. And I tell that all the time to people.
yeah. Scholarship must deal with probabilities and weighing probabilities and what is probable, possible, impossible, plausible, and we're basically just putting stuff in those categories and trying to progress our knowledge. When you're arguing from this position that either you prove me entirely false or I win, you're not really engaging in good faith. You're just trying to protect a dogma. But you're also deploying precisely what you're trying to defend your dogma against other dogmas. And so I find it just wildly hypocritical. I find it wildly inconsistent. And the same thing about people who talk to me all the time or accuse me all the time of being methodologically corrupt because I don't allow for the possibility of real prophecy. And it's like, well, no, it's not that I don't allow for it personally. It's that methodologically, if you ever allow for it, you have to allow for all of it. You cannot say it's legit here, it's not legit there. So if you're saying, well, you should allow the Bible's prophecies to be possible, well, then I've got to allow every religious text prophecies to be possible, because the moment you say, well, not that one, you're applying the methodologies to that prophecy that you said we're not allowed to apply over here. And so just from a methodological point of view, that is not consistent. That is not helpful. That is just protecting a dogma. And I find that that's what most of these folks are doing, is just trying to protect a dogma and then trying to make their protection of that dogma sound as defensible and as legitimate and as methodologically robust as they can. And that's the real exercise. Make it sound legitimate. But in reality, it's always inconsistent. It's always hypocritical. It's always methodologically corrupt.
That's exactly why this heuristic comparison of other legends, apotheosis, birth narratives, and things like that, whether they're genealogically connected or not, is irrelevant to my point on saying, why not Caesar Augustus be born with these divine portents? You look at it and say it's legend, and me and you sing kumbaya, high five, and say amen together. We get to this text, and your whole everything, oh, we got to take this one is so special and unique. We got to take this case very, and then you can easily see the scholars. You see comparison of the Gospels that don't agree on those narratives, and which one's true amongst those, and which one really happened, and like it's so obvious to me that I love learning this stuff, and I love the stories and the narratives, but it just seems more like this falls into the category of a certain genre rather than this is literal historical, what is actually the case. And so anyway, I'm venting at this point because what you've done there is so well said, exactly the debate that just happened with Bart Ehrman. And you've got something coming up with Bart Ehrman on your podcast, speaking of which.
Yes.
Yeah. But Bart Ehrman was debating the resurrection and literally was kind of pointing out this fact to the Justin Bass guy on Unbelievable podcast. And he's like, look, you're not doing that with all these others. So he had to bring up Mormonism and say there's 4 or 5 eyewitnesses about the golden plates scenario and Joseph Smith's having a vision of Jesus. And then they brought it to the Pauline stuff. Anyway, I think Bart was being consistent and saying, well, why aren't you doing that with this and you do it with that? Of course, they have their reasons why Mormonism is falsified or it's not true or they don't trust it. They don't agree with it. So do I when it comes to certain other religious claims and religious beliefs. But I would almost try to do it across the board. I'm trying to be even. That's where,
And a lot of people just don't. Once it is their social identity that is in the crosshairs, it feels unfair, and that's just a natural human reaction.
Right.
And so, yeah. But I interviewed Bart yesterday regarding his new book. It's here somewhere, Armageddon, What the Bible Really Says About the End. We had a wonderful discussion, and that should come out in a few weeks. And we're going to be dropping the first episode of my podcast this weekend.
On YouTube?
We'll put it on YouTube. We're going to find some other places for it. I think my partner went live with our Patreon. So I've had a lot of questions about how we can support. I don't know that he has any tiers up yet, so I don't know if that's even working, but patreon.com/Data Over Dogma is the address for that. The Data Over Dogma podcast, yeah, it's going to be on YouTube. I've got a Twitter account right now, Data_over_Dogma. Yeah, we'll have that stuff set up, but the first episode will go live. And we'll push it out to a bunch of podcast hosting platforms.
Is that in your link tree, your Patreon yet?
My Patreon, my own McClellan Patreon is in my link tree. The Data Over Dogma one is not there yet.
So there's two different. Okay.
Yeah, I will get it there. So yeah, that's the Data Over Dogma podcast is a partnership with a friend, and so I keep that distinct from my McClellan stuff.
Well, here, I'll put that one here in the chat right now, and I ask that everybody take the time, obviously, to subscribe to your YouTube. We got a couple more super chats. I just want to bounce from those and get into. Oh, yeah. Wow, you're really dropping some stuff here. Oh, I know that guy.
Oh gosh, yeah, that was the slavery panel promo I did.
Yeah,
he was talking about the slave Bible.
Well, go check him out. Help support the academics you appreciate. That's the goal, right? We're going to refresh this in just a minute. So please, while we have a few more super chats, go subscribe to Dr. Dan McClellan if you like what you hear and you want to hear more. Trust me, he's doing God's work. Okay, I mean that. I'm not kidding. You know, I have Christians who actually love what I do, Dan, and I love them. I don't care about their ontology. They're saints to me. They're so nice. They're so loving. They're great people. They don't judge me because I think differently at the end of the day. There are some radical, I would say, social and ethical and ideological battles that go on. And that is where it's like, okay, hold up. We've got some issues. So Hang Fi Shy, forgive me if I butchered that. It seems a theme that the cosmos is often made out of the body of vanquished gods ever since Francesca Stavrakopoulou's book. It seems Judaism has this too, but the dividing of Tahom, is this a sex assault?
So there is an argument to make that a lot of what's going on in some of these early mythologies is the male assault on a female body. And you see this in there's even some ways that this happens in the Bible. For instance, in the book of Revelation, you have this comment about the person will be, I think most Bible translations say, I will throw her on her sick bed. And it doesn't really say sick bed. It just says, I will throw her on the bed. And there's an argument to make. I think Stephen Moore does it effectively, that this is a sexual assault of the whore of Babylon, this person who's being represented as a sex worker. And yeah, so the deity can be sometimes represented as someone who, and I think we see it in Ezekiel and maybe even Jeremiah as well, where God is going to pull their skirts up over their face to expose them, to shame them, which is also a species of sexual assault. And so if authors found it rhetorically helpful to represent the deity as doing that in some of these metaphors where God is the wife, then they were happy to do it, because women were not really represented as fully autonomous agents unto themselves, having full personhood and autonomy. And so they could be used to symbolize that. And so, yeah, there's a degree to which, yes, the creation of the earth in some of these mythologies. And then you have some even weirder ones where ancient Egypt, there's one mythology where the material of the universe was created by a deity pleasuring themselves and spurting out everything in the universe. And so there's a whole...
Isn't it? I think our friend, the Egyptologist Karakuni, said something about They pleasured themselves with their hand. They put it in their mouth, and then they spit it out.
spewed
Now
out,
you got
yeah.
creation.
Yeah. So there's a broad range of what they found entertaining anciently. But yeah, that's a genre. Don't try to Google that genre of creation story. But
Right.
yeah, they did a lot of weird stuff.
I was
Back there.
thinking of, I wondered if Marduk and Tiamat had any overlap there, but I've even heard the idea that Leviathan, the destruction of this creature, or Lotan in Hittite ideas, but that the creation from the dragon or the beast, the serpent, that watery chaos figure, if that, does that have any sexual inclination there, or is it just purely warfare?
So I would say that's mostly warfare going on there, but it is taming chaos. It is taking what is chaotic and bringing it into order.
Right.
And so in the Babylonian account, Tiamat is a chaos deity, and so Tiamat is female, and so there are some ways that the feminine is represented as chaotic, and so bringing order to the chaotic is about taming the feminine. I mean, you can find that in some places. I don't think it's incredibly salient in the Bible, but absolutely that is a dimension of what is going on in some places in the ancient world.
Wow.
And
Okay.
then, yeah, and I think you could even talk about Proverbs. Proverbs talks about women who are chaotic, and how no, you need a wife who is calm and who is going to be on your side and all that kind of stuff. So it, some of that to some degree is bubbling to the surface in some of the wisdom literature.
Thank you. Temi, thank you for the super chat or super sticker and being a member. We need to get the last couple here and wrap it up. Constellation Pegasus. Whenever I hear the word junk, it reminds me of "Don't Tase Me, Bro" soundbite. Not sure why I'm super chatting this. Thank you for that. And then Steve says, is Elohim in Genesis 1:1 singular or plural?
Singular. So Elohim can be singular or plural. Throughout all of Genesis 1, Elohim is singular. You can tell by looking at the pronouns and the verbs. So, Bereshit bara Elohim. Bara is in the singular. So, Elohim is the subject. It is singular. And even in Genesis 1:26, it says, Elohim says, let us make. And so that let us make is that first person plural cohortative or imperative. And Elohim is not the subject of the verb let us make. And so Elohim is not being used in a plural in there. Now, when we get to Genesis 3, Genesis 6, Genesis 11, we do have plural uses of Elohim, but in 1, it's all singular.
All right, that's it on the supers. Dropping the banner, no more supers. Let's close this vote here in poll. Does the Bible express, Yahweh El to have a body? And let's see if that shows up in my StreamYard here. There we go. Let's see. It isn't showing up on this end. Okay, yes. Does the Bible express Yahweh El as having a physical body? 59% of people said yes, which is shocking that it's not more. Not sure, 25%, which is okay. Maybe there's just not sure. And then 14% said no, with 528 votes. Just figure I'd let you know where the voting count was on that. Why not? I like to do that. Have you subscribed to Dr. Dan McClellan? Well, it's too late right now in terms of knowing the numbers, but we're about to refresh 14.3K subscribers, refreshing now. And later on, I'm going to be checking this as well. 14.4. So at least can you see more details to see if we at least got 100 people over, Dan?
Let me take a look real quick.
And
while I'm at it, I also, I don't know if I gave you the something went wrong. I don't know if I gave you the URL earlier, but we also have the Data Over Dogma YouTube channel. So youtube.com/@Data Over Dogma. If anyone is interested in subscribing there, that will be where we will put all of our episodes. So we are recording. There's nothing there yet, but we are recording audio and video, and so we'll put those there. Let's see what I'm gonna do. Let me see
how many subscribers we got you.
Okay.
All right, let's take a look.
Analytics. I
Someone
don't
said
know
they
how
subbed you.
granular I can. I don't know how granular I can get on this, but
Does it show
think,
you exact? It should if you go in your analytics.
yeah. So what time did we start? 11.
Yes.
So
10,
7.
10 Pacific, but
10 Pacific, 11 a.m. my time. So what I'm
yes.
looking at is my time. So there were 748 subscribers between 11 and 12, and 638 between 12 and 1. So that would be 1,387.
Hold on YouTube.
Oh, that's no.
That's a lot. I was gonna say that's
No, yeah. I'm
unbelievable.
sorry. I'm I'm looking at views. Where's the subscriber? I clicked on subscribers over on the side, and I thought it would update this bar on the right. Yeah, I don't know how to see how granular I can get. I'm a noob.
Well, we
With
see
YouTube,
I know
so
they had 14.3 when I first
well,
started, and then now it's at 14.4. So we're at
yeah,
least 100, and I hope more
yeah.
will follow suit and go support you. What you're doing is extremely important. I think it's needed in this, what we're talking about, this ideological war, the culture war, and just critical thinking war of like, and I'm using war, and I probably shouldn't because it gives off a vibe that I don't know if it's needed, but it is a battle that not enough people are practicing critical thinking in their approach on these things. And I think it harms a lot of others who aren't like them, who aren't thinking the way that they're thinking about these things.
Yeah.
So someone super chatted literally just to say, keep fighting the TikTok nonsense. Great work.
Well,
Any
thank you. I
final words
appreciate
from
it.
you?
I appreciate the kind words that I've seen in the comments, and the great questions that have been asked, and I appreciate the support from the folks here. It is, I'm not a huge fan of framing things militantly, but
Right.
we are trying to help people live better lives. We're trying to help people be able to think more critically and more productively about themselves and the people around them, because there are lots of ways that a lot of this thinking, when it is combined with access to systemic power, can harm and can hurt. And that was something that I brought up with Bart yesterday, where he talks about Revelation. When we look at apocalyptic literature in the ancient world, it's being written by the underdogs. It's being written by the oppressed. But when the oppressed becomes the oppressor, and that text is still authoritative, they need to find themselves in it. And so they need to find oppressors out there who are oppressing them. And that usually means the oppressor then tries to frame the people they're oppressing as the aggravators. And that usually results in more oppression on their part. And so there are a lot of folks these days who are being hurt by Christian nationalism and by religious fundamentalism, and particularly in the U.S. by Christian fundamentalism. And so if people can learn to think a little more critically, that doesn't mean they have to give up their faith.
Right.
But I think we do need to give up the boundary maintenance and the attempts to try to wield power over those who are more vulnerable, more marginalized, more minoritized than we are, because that's just hurting people. And if anybody believes that everybody in the world is a son or daughter of God, it means we're hurting God's children. And if you are someone who believes in that, then that should hopefully be a bad thing in your view, as I know it is in yours, Derek, and most of the people who probably follow your channel.
Dan, you couldn't have said it better. I really appreciate you coming out here and talking with us, educating us. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, especially you. And yeah, keep me updated. Let me know how the subscriber thing goes. You can help support him, huh?
Will do.
Please do. And you can help support us. You can help support him down in the description. I hope you have a wonderful day. Never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.